Hey guys, what's going on? It's Chris Carrino. This is the Voice of the Nets podcast. We really appreciate you joining us here for the first postseason podcast that we're doing. The Nets season ended over 2 weeks ago, and there's this cooling off period. I think a lot of us needed the cooling off period. Looking at social media and some of the things that were being said, I think we had to let everything kind of die down. New information comes forward. And then you could kind of make a thoughtful response to what we saw when the season ended. So I thought here with the Voice of the Nets, we'd wait until Sean Marks addressed the media after this little cooling down period so that we could, better bring you our thoughts and look forward to what's going to happen now coming up in the offseason and then the upcoming 22-23 season. So for that, I'm going to bring in Nets radio analyst, my partner for the last 20 years, Tim Capstraw, and from BrooklynNets.com, the great Tom Dowd, who's also going to be a producer and helping us out with this podcast as well as a contributor. So we bring TD in here, because TD sits in the front row for every press conference, and he was there the other day when Sean Marks and Steve Nash addressed the media. And guys, I'm going to start out with just something that Sean Marks said that I think was the telling quote that came out of the press conference the other day. And he said, "We have prided ourselves in the past with finding players with a chip on their shoulder, with a resilience, with something to prove. We're going to have to go back to that. Our team is going to look vastly different every single year. It has to if you look at our financials. When you have two guys signed up for a long-term match contract, that leaves you pretty limited on your financial resources and assets to continue to build with. It's going to be a slightly revolving circle down here. We've got the draft right. Our group has shown that we can draft right. The culture isn't what it quite was." This again, Sean Marks. "We've certainly got to get back to the drawing board here a little bit, and that's the best way I can say it. We're looking for guys that want to come in here and be part of something bigger than themselves. Play selfless, play team basketball, and be available. That guy goes not only for Kyrie, but for everybody here. We need people here that want to be here, that are selfless, that want to be part of something bigger than themselves. There's an objective and there's a goal at stake here. In order to do that, we're going to need availability from everybody." Now, if you listen to our broadcast, and Capper knows this, one of my favorite shows was The Sopranos. And, the end of The Sopranos kind of left things up to interpretation. But David Chase, who created the show and wrote it, he directed the final episode. And he wrote it. And he said, you guys can interpret it however you want. But everything is right there. So he didn't show you everything, but he put it all out there. Sean Marks didn't show us everything that he's thinking. But Capper, it's all there. What he just said in that quote that I read to everybody, it's all right there about what his intentions are going forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I thought it was as intelligent and authoritative as could possibly be done. I thought it was just well said. You could tell there was thought behind it. There was an intensity behind it. And I just thought, things had to be said, but I think the way that he said it showed his intelligence and, again, his authority. And I thought I was nothing short of very impressed.
Sean Marks, and Tom, you could speak to this as well. He doesn't just go into these media scrums and shoot off a stream of consciousness. I mean, everything that he says, I don't know, calculated sometimes is not a great word, but it's well thought out. I mean, he wanted to get a certain thing across, and he certainly did. I think the quote that I read kind of got everybody's attention. But I don't think he was picking on anybody. I don't think he's revealing the cards that he's going to play. But from a chemistry standpoint, this team has to have a better chemistry. It has to have a better spirit. And it starts with the players. They drive the culture. That's another thing that Sean Marks said. He said the players drive the culture.
Yeah, Chris, you mentioned that cooling down period. And I think what Sean said yesterday addressed what the fan base wanted to hear a little bit in terms of this is not in the way that we wanted to. And the thing that struck me from Sean and from Steve a little bit yesterday is the messaging very different from the end of last year. And they both referenced that. Last year we could talk about a hamstring and ankle. They referenced it to the size of Kevin's shoe on the 3-point line. And this was not that. This was, Steve said, to just say, well, if everybody gets healthy, things will be okay. Steve used the word foolhardy, right? This was, we need to look at everything we do and how we can do things different.
Yeah, and Cap, I think you and I have talked about this off air, and we've had our own cooling off period as well for us to sort of kind of look at this and objectively see what it was. Last year you mentioned, and Tom, you just mentioned KD's foot, right? And it gave everybody this sense of, wow, look at how close the Nets were, because they were so close to beating Milwaukee. Milwaukee won a championship. But even Kevin Durant said before the start of this season, the way they went about it, with Kevin kind of carrying them with all the injuries, like, it wasn't sustainable. He's like, I couldn't play 48 minutes a night and still win another 2 rounds. So this idea that if I had made that shot or it was a 3, that, we would have won a championship is not the reality here. And Cabra, I think, we talked about this after the sweep, which, by the way, listen, I know fans don't want to hear this, but I think it was the 3rd closest point differential in a sweep in NBA history. I mean, when you think about, sometimes sweeps or 5-game series can be close, but still be a sweep. Now, I'm not saying it felt like the Nets were going to win the series, right, but game 1 was a buzzer beater. Game 2, they've got a double-digit lead. Games 3 and 4 were all within 1 or 2 possessions in the 4th quarter. It wasn't like these games were blowouts. But when you look at what's it going to take to present some change here, Capper, maybe the sweep was the impetus for that. Maybe it now everything isn't so, you're not covering up a lot of the deficiencies here. It's bringing it to light, and maybe that is what now will constitute some change.
Yeah, I think we sort of said that right away, that maybe the idea of being beaten a first round in a sweep is a huge wake up call. And you talked about sustainable. What is sustainable? What we've learned it wasn't sustainable this year was playing guys over 40 minutes to get into the playoffs, to get yourself in a comfortable position, and what that might have done to certain players prior to entering a competitive series against the Boston Celtics. Listen, it's a wake up call. It has occurred. And I think when I'm looking at the Boston Celtics, I'm looking at the Milwaukee Bucks, and I say, yes, they were swept, but yes, this is, as I look at the roster and I look at where the Nets are, I also feel like, and the Miami Heat, I should say, that they're right. They're not that far off either. And in fact, the players are there, but what Sean Marks is addressing, if he can get those parts of everything there, then this Nets team has an opportunity to be something special based on what I'm observing still in the playoffs right now.
Yeah, and they were humbled, by the Celtics in the sweep, and I think that's a change in mindset as well, because we've talked about this early on last season when everybody was anointing them the NBA champions, and they were one of the top 2 favorites to get to the finals and to win a championship. And, they were in the top 1 or 2 spots in the East until Kevin Durant gets hurt, and they have that month of December. And they weren't playing with that chip on their shoulder. They weren't beating the really good teams.
Right.
And then when the injuries hit, and then they started losing games, and Kyrie wasn't back yet, they kind of got that back to a little bit more of a chip on their shoulder. But as you mentioned, Tim, they had to keep, playing so many minutes and play so hard down the stretch, and it didn't really set themselves up right for success in the postseason. But when you look at going in now to this next season, maybe that did restore a little bit of that chip on their shoulder, a little bit of what we have to prove it now, going forward. And also the playoffs are showing you now what you need to put around the star players. I mean, Capper, the Celtic series was an eye-opener in terms of the kind of players you got to put on the floor.
Absolutely. And what the Celtics had done as far as how they had built their team and how they had this identity, and the Nets certainly that were exposed by their length, their size, their ability, their switchability, and also their ability to dominate the Nets on the backboard because of the Nets' lack of size at certain spots. And again, yes, it taught the Nets an awful lot. And again, I mean, you're looking at pieces and you're saying, well, there's no size, there's not enough size out there. But then you're saying, well, boy, Ben Simmons and Joe Harris provide nice size. That's going to help. I mean, so it's there, and there are pieces you got to still fortify your team with right now. But you've learned a lot of teams find out who they are. The Nets found out who they aren't. And I think it came to a situation where, maybe, especially when you're not just the news, but even players, other players in the media, whatever, the Nets players hear what they have to say. And I think there was going to be a real underdog mentality and I'll show them mentality next year. And I'm looking forward to watching it.
The way they're going to be able to construct this team, and he talked, Sean Marks touched on it in his press conference, with the financials the way they are, when you've got all that money tied up in three players, and again, we don't know what the Kyrie Irving situation is going to be, but when you have that, when you talk Ben Simmons, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, their three salaries, when you have that much tied up in three players, you have to get very creative. And the players around them are going to change drastically from year to year. It's got to be young players. It's got to be veterans that are coming in that have taken less money. But I think overall, it goes back to you need more two-way players, more shooters, and maybe younger guys that you need to develop rather than older established guys who are chasing a championship, because sometimes those guys can get bogged down at the end of the bench and then be disgruntled about not playing, or you got to find some more hungry guys out there. And I think that's a little bit to what Sean Marks was alluding to when he talked about changing the culture and getting back to guys playing with a little chip on their shoulder. A little more of that team that they had a few years ago that went to the playoffs with D'Angelo Russell and that crew. And then you have Kevin Durant on your team.
Right.
I think that's kind of what you're kind of trying to get back to. And in theory, I mean, last year going in, DeAndre Bembry, Javon Carter, James Johnson, in theory, that's what you thought you were getting from those guys. Things worked out where they couldn't hold on to Bembry because they had a clearer spot. Javon Carter had a clearer spot, but he was a little inconsistent. James Johnson was never got going offensively. He was, again, you're talking about guys that are giving you one thing, but they're not giving you another. You got to find more Bruce Browns. You got to find more of these rookies out there because with the financial constraints that you have, that's the only way you're going to fill out your roster.
Yeah, that's how it's going to be for the Nets. I mean, you've got to be creative. You got to be intelligent. You could possibly find an experienced player over in Europe that would come for the right price.
I think Kevin Durant's doing some scouting.
Might be doing some scouting over there right now. And there are guys over there that have come before that have helped the Nets.
Yeah. We went to go watch Mike James, right?
Mike James, right?
He was over there watching him.
He was impactful 2 years ago. He was, but there's guys like that. There might be a tall, lengthy, think about, Ben Simmons, point guard. Well, I think the Nets need more length too, right? They need length. They need size. You want 3-and-D guys on the wings, but at the same time, you don't want Kyrie Irving necessarily at the point guard. So is there a tall point guard out there that has some experience that could fill a role for the Nets right now? You're looking for all these different pieces that can fit around. But again, that is why the core players that you're spending your money on, you have to have. You have to have them. So otherwise, the other pieces don't fit. If you're looking back at this season and you're saying, well, we had to put our money into 3 different guys or 3 different players and then sprinkle around before. Well, if you didn't have but 1.5 the whole time, what did you expect? Did we expect too much? I don't know. But that's how you've got to put your teams together. And that's why it's important, yes, to have your stars if you're going to put that money out there in them, and then being very intelligent and balanced. You're right. We don't know. You never know the inner workings of a team, but Bill Parcells, I think, once said, "Nothing tougher, harder to coach than the aging star." And the Nets had a few of those this year that had to be difficult at times, and for a lot of them, I really admired, to tell you the truth, from a distance. Yeah. But I don't know the day-to-day either with these guys. But that you can maybe have a little of that and a little youth and maybe a little experience somewhere else, but you've got to fill in these spots. And Nets know what they're missing. They got to see if they can find it.
If you go back right to the beginning of the year and you just said, what are the attributes of this team? Are they fast and athletic? Are they big and strong? Are they defensive minded? Those weren't the things. This was a team built to be a supremely skilled offensive team. And they weren't able to get those guys on the floor together. And then those other issues around them then kind of came to the fore, particularly when Durant gets hurt.
Yeah, it's about the star. I mean, listen, they're a star-driven team. And that doesn't mean that, and again, I think Sean Marks' comments the other day, there was a little bit of trying to tell everybody, the fans, that, we're in charge. Like, this is, you have to coddle to your stars sometimes, and you treat them well, but they have to know who's in charge and whose team this is. And I think that you're obviously going to go as far as your stars are going to take you when you have stars like they have. I think the important thing is, though, I think this team this year, it was a little bit of a mosaic. Remember, they played at Izod. Now Izod was overtaken in the last years there by the mall, right? That was going up. Yeah. And it looked
Where are you going with this?
It looked like Legos, right? And it supposedly was designed that way, right? There was going to be a Lego store going in there. They wanted to look like Legos. So it had all these mismatched patterns and colors and things like that. And, at times the net roster this year took on that tone. Because obviously Sean Marks is saying, well, I've got my stars here, but now suddenly one of them's not there, another one's not playing the way he was supposed to play. And now we've got all these mismatched pieces. Like, there's a lot of words that get thrown around here with this net team. Availability is one. And you just mentioned that, Tim, talking about, and the stars have to be available and you need those guys. You're building around those guys. Continuity is another. I mean, that's something that Steve Nash has always talked about all year long. How can you have continuity when you have 40 some odd different starting lineups? So many guys who can play home games, who can't play home games, who's hurt. You had COVID situation, obviously, but continuity is a big part of it. And I think you saw Steve Nash down the stretch try to get some continuity over the last couple of weeks of the season. He kind of cut down his rotation to 9 guys. It left some guys out. That affected the chemistry. But you need that continuity, the availability, and then they need some more duplicates, right? They need, and that may sound funny because you say, well, you don't want duplicates, right? Well, no, you need a guy that when one guy goes down, another guy can step in. And not that we have 5 centers on the roster, and if one goes down or one's playing well, now we have to completely change the rotation because all 5 guys are completely different players. They just had a number of players who, one guy is out there, can defend, but maybe can't shoot. One guy can shoot, but he's too small in the defensive end. Like, they need a little bit more to guard against when a guy goes down, that you don't have to completely change all the other pieces.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the idea of, two-way players with size. And the other thing you got to bring up right now is what we were, since the moment the new management has taken over, and even going back to Kenny Atkinson, what we've been blown away by was player development. And there are players in this organization right now that are capable of contributing at a higher level than they did this year. There's going to be, I think there's pressure on these rookies. There's going to be an opportunity and for them to improve, to prove their worth. They showed glimpses. They all have a chance. You know what I mean? They all have a chance to be good, and nobody's a lock. Let's be honest. And so can they, in the next several months, improve to a level and be impactful in their second year? I think that's a big part of it also.
Yeah, that rookie class is such an X factor, right? And by X factor, it could end up being completely inconsequential. But it also affects what they want to do personnel-wise, because their view on these guys from what they got last year of Cam Thomas, of Day'Ron Sharp, and Kessler Edwards. And how does that affect what they want to do and who they want to bring in? Do they think these 3 guys can be rotation guys for them next year? If not, they need to make some decisions in who they get.
Yeah, guys make probably the biggest leap most guys make in their careers from year 1 to year 2. No, Capper. Yes. I mean, that's why it becomes even more important to see what kind of player. I mean, Cam Thomas has been in the gym the last couple of weeks. He's been around. He's been in the gym. Kessler Edwards had a major role last year, and then kind of, he kind of shrunk in the playoffs, and that's a big jump. But David Dukes of the world, but
Day'Ron Sharp. Day'Ron Sharp. Hey, I saw a guy transform his body last year. And go to one level. Can he go to another level of fitness and ability so he can be a guy that could be that could switch out on guards, that could play and has a knack for rebounding and can shoot the ball and pass the ball and do some things. I'm just curious. It's there for them too. It's not just hunting everywhere else. And think about it. These guys were not necessarily drafted high, but you look around the league and there's been a number of guys that maybe they didn't come in as superstars, but had developed into that. You watch the rosters and watch guys playing it right now in the playoffs, and that's what you're seeing. You see a number of guys that are second-round guys that get an opportunity, and they've made the most of it. Nets could use some of that.
Remember what Day'Ron Sharp told us before the season, Cap?
Yeah.
That he's got a lot more than he can show than people think. We'll see. Get in the gym, see if he can start, stretching the floor a little bit, making threes.
He's got a chance. But the biggest thing I saw, he was 10 to 15 pounds lighter as the season went on. And that shows me a commitment. Kessler Edwards, will he get tougher? Will his shot become consistent? He looks like the profile of the player you're thinking about with the Nets, right?
Yeah.
You're thinking about 6'7" length. He can defend enough, can shoot enough, but can you do everything better? Can you do it more consistently?
Interesting is that can Edwards become a more consistent 3-point shooter? Because we know he can defend, right? If Joe Harris is able to come back healthy from his ankle surgery, he's a 6'6" guy who has some size, is much better on the defensive end than people maybe give him credit for, and he can shoot. He's a two-way player. Ben Simmons, shooting isn't there right now. If he comes back healthy, though, when you talk about Day'Ron Sharp and you talk about Ben Simmons, they do something that the Nets have really struggled with. They rebound the offensive glass. I mean, the Nets' offensive rebounding improved dramatically in that period of time when Day'Ron Sharp was playing. Ben Simmons, I think in his career, is about 7 offensive rebounds, in a game. He's a guy that could potentially do that for you. So there are the pieces, right? And we talk about the young guys, can they develop? The pieces are there. And then, by the way, you still have Kevin Durant. And this is the team is still only going to go as far as Kevin Durant goes. But I think now they have a little better sense of of how the whole thing should work. It's not that we need a guy who's coming in and going to be a star. We need a guy that's going to support the star. Do the thing that the stars need to do. When you look at how the Nets can get better here, Tom, the options that they have, the tools that Sean Marks has right now, what are some of those things that he can do to improve this roster during this offseason?
Well, I mean, you start with some of the question marks about guys coming back, guys like Bruce Brown, unrestricted free agent, Nick Claxton, restricted free agent. What do they do there? And do those guys leave holes or not? After that, he has a decision to make on a draft pick by June 1st, right? He's got to decide, is he keeping the draft pick for 2022, the one they got from Philly? Does he push it to 2023? And or is that draft pick going to get traded for somebody else? He's got some trade exceptions to work with if he wants to use that draft pick in a deal. He's got an $11.3 million trade exception. He's got a $6 million trade exception. And then they got that taxpayer mid-level exception. I think that's what they used to get Patty Mills last year. You've got $6 million there. So you have some avenues to find some guys who can play.
And a guy like, so we talked about the center position, Claxton, they'll have to make a qualifying offer to, and then he becomes a restricted free agent, meaning that you can match anything that anyone else gives him. Bruce Brown is an unrestricted free agent, but you have his bird right, so you can go over the cap, which is important because the Nets don't have the cap space. They can use that mid-level, right? You just talked about it. But a player like Andre Drummond, you can't go more than that mid-level. And if you want to sign Drummond, I believe you have to sign him for that mid-level. And every dollar the Nets spend is really like $3 because they're so far over the cap. And it's a commitment. It's a commitment from Joe Tsai in what he's going to allow Sean Marks to do here. Because you signed Bruce Brown $10 million, it's really like $30 million.
Yeah.
But it might be the only way you can improve because if you don't sign him, it's not like now you have that money to spend somewhere else.
That is the challenge, right? That is the challenge. That is where the Nets are at right now. They have options, but it's not great. And again, Chris, I keep saying it. That's why the commitment from the 3 stars is of all, such importance. But you're right, dressing it up around there and having these options. We've seen the creativity all along with this, with management. I'm sure there'll be some prudent decisions being made.
I mean, Capper, you and TD, I mean, you guys like a good steakhouse. We go on the road, get a nice little steak somewhere. I mean, the ambiance could be great. The Brussels sprouts could be really good. Maybe they got good hash browns or something. But if the steak ain't good, we're going to walk away going, that we're not going back there. That place isn't any good. Like it's got to be the main course. It's got to be it. Right? All the other pieces just support it, but the main course has got to be there.
I love when you do those. I love when you do that. I can just hear, I need to keep a record of these different analogies you give or whatever they're called. That was just beautiful.
I was in the gym we were there for the press conference the other day and they had some guys working out that are potential draft picks. And Tom, you just mentioned the Sixers pick, which I believe is what, the 23rd pick?
Yes.
23, yeah.
So they have to make a decision now at the end of the month whether or not they want to push that to next year or they want to keep that. And you think about the details that go into putting a team together. Sean Marks is already now looking at who could be available at 23 and make sure we work these guys out. We've talked to them because sometimes a guy will stand out to you. And you go, man, you know what? We might be able to get this guy. And if maybe it looks like somebody might be 20, how could we move up to maybe get him? So they're going to make a decision on that pick. I don't know if they're necessarily looking at it as, well, we know next year it's unprotected. James Harden didn't work out maybe great in Philly and Joel Embiid's been hurt and maybe the Sixers drop and we'll get a better position next year. Maybe that's a factor in it a little bit. But I think they're doing their due diligence already and saying, is there a guy that can help us right away.
Yeah.
Right? Because this team's not looking for a guy they can draft with that 23rd pick and then, stash him for 4 years. Like, is there a guy right now that can help us right away? I just thought it was interesting that is the level of detail right now that's happening behind the scenes.
The level of detail that goes on, I can only imagine between the assistant GMs, Sean Marks, everybody, all the analysis that goes on and analytics that goes on. The details of every decision is just enormous.
Yeah.
Not just comfortably watching video. I kind of like that guy. No, it is calculated. It is thought out. It is determined. And you are right. You have information on every potential draft pick that is out there right now. You leave no stone unturned. And I'm talking about I mentioned it before. I think you're looking all around the world right now too. I mean, you always are, but I think that could be an option also.
And also these draft picks they got from Philadelphia and some of these young guys we just talked about, I mean, they could be used in trades as well. I mean, you think about when we talked about this when you were trying to get out of where they were when Sean Marks took over. Was a lot of, you got to draft well, but then you also have to develop your assets. Not necessarily that they're going to help you, but then you can move them for other assets. And that's where those trade exemptions come in too, Tommy. I mean, you talk about a trade exemption, but you could attach a draft pick to it, and then that might get you a role player that really becomes valuable.
Yeah, it's that combination of the draft pick and again, these younger guys, because that's the one way you can get somebody on a bit of a salary. Without kind of having to send something out that matches it.
I saw, as we tape this, we're taping this on Friday the 13th of May. That's how daring we are. We do it. We don't care about that kind of stuff. Yesterday, I saw Amari Stoudemire made the rounds, and kind of was, he first time we found out that Amari was not going to be on the staff next year. Steve Nash was next to Sean Marks. He may have a different coaching staff this year. We'll see. I'm sure those are part of all the conversations that have gone on over the last couple of weeks. But we do know that, Sean Marks has faith in Steve Nash, and he's giving Steve Nash another opportunity here to coach this team going forward, knowing that these were unusual 2 years for a guy to be a head coach for the first time, Capper. I mean, it's a daunting task if you've never been a head coach on any level, and to have to go through the things that he went through in his first 2 years when he's trying to get his footing has been very difficult. And I think they thought it was only fair that he gets an opportunity going into this year.
Yeah, no, and I certainly had no problem with that. I've been very much impressed with whenever we've communicated or watched Steve Nash. And he certainly did. This is unprecedented issues right now. What stands out to me and going and watching the last couple of days is that, first of all, I watch the Miami Heat a lot, and I see Pat Riley in the stands. And he's got Eric Spoelstra, who he groomed and developed. And I kind of feel like the statements of Sean Marks has a little Pat Riley to it. He has a presence about him, Sean Marks, that I think that if the players know that the general manager or the guy in charge, the boss, has the coach's back, then I think that's terrific. So then I think that's exactly what a team needs, a coach needs. And I think that's what Steve Nash has right now. And I feel like there's a little bit of that going on. Now, I don't think you're walking around as comfortable these days. I know, I'll be honest with you, I know Sean Marks a little bit. I say hello to him, and he's one of the most congenial, pleasant, intelligent people I've met from my distance. But you know something else? I'm like in my 60s, right? I wouldn't mess with him. And there's something about people that you don't mess with. And I think there's a little bit of that going on in the organization right now that will trickle down, that will give Steve Nash hand. And I think it will provide a wake-up call for everybody in the organization right now.
Yeah, it's funny you made the Heat analogy and the Pat Riley analogy, because I think I heard someone say this the other day, and I remember this was, there was a time where LeBron James had gotten to Miami, and the rumor was that he was not happy with Eric Spoelstra. And listen, no one has ever been a bigger presence on his team than LeBron James. And there was that thought of, well, wow, if LeBron doesn't like Eric Spoelstra, will they change coaches? And Pat Riley made it very clear. Eric Spoelstra is my guy. Like, you're not going to decide who the coach is. I am. Now, I'm not comparing Eric Spoelstra to Steve Nash or that situation to what's going on with the Nets, but
I'm just saying I got a little of that vibe.
Yeah,
I got a little of that vibe right now.
There is a sense of, listen, I have conjecture, if that's the right word. I understand. I have made decisions for a certain reason, and I'm going to stand by them.
Yep.
Right. I mean, that's basically, I think even him, Sean Marks just being in that press conference was a little bit of like, I have faith in what we're doing here. And maybe I got away from it a little bit, and that's on me. But I promise you that's not going to happen anymore. And at least that was the message. Tommy, you were there in the front row. Like, that's kind of the message that hit you when he spoke the other day.
Yeah, it was kind of like reasserting a mission statement, right? Like, this is who we are. This is who we've been. This is who we want to be. And if we haven't been there, we're going to get back to it and fix it. And, I love the Pat Riley analogy because I'll tell you, every once in a while, Sean comes by the 7th floor, kind of addresses the business staff as well. And very commanding. I mean, you want to go through a wall for this guy. People just respond to him. And I have no doubt it's like that on the 8th floor as well with the basketball staff.
As we try and, put a ribbon on this thing and get us ready. And again, we'll talk more as we get closer, free agency and we'll get into the draft and all that kind of stuff. Cabra, what are you, when you're watching these playoffs right now, you're watching these other teams play, and we talked about the first round, is there anything jumping out at you that's a lesson for the Nets and the how they have to put things together and how they have to look going into next season as far as where the league is at right now and who's succeeding?
Well, I think they've already known, though. I think you can see it. I think you can see that if you're going to be in switching and switchable defenses is a big part of the NBA right now. You have to have the length to be able to do that, not only to be able to cover the players, but to be able to rebound the basketball. I think the Nets learned that all season long. I think in a lot of these games, you're learning that it's unbelievable how many years I used to say to you, Chris, during the games, why doesn't anybody at least try zone defense? Why doesn't anybody at least try it and give it a look? Maybe to disrupt the rhythm. I see that a lot. And I think if the Nets roster is not going to be perfect and you're going to have some height issues at times, they may want to work at that a little bit more instead of sprinkling on into their team as they go along through the season. Be more prepared to be able to play some zone. I see teams struggle for periods of times against zone defenses. So those are a couple of things that stand out to me. And I also what I always say when I feel like I'm bringing some great analysis to these broadcasts, right? You ask me sometimes, and I feel like I'm not doing anything by saying, well, the team that makes their shots is going to win. You gotta be able to make shots. You gotta be able to make threes. You gotta be able to shoot the basketball. And so those are the things that continue to stand out to me. The other thing is playing hard is a talent. And I watch teams dig in right now and get after it. And there's an overall physicality about what's going on and how they compete. The compete level every time out on the floor is unbelievable in the playoffs. And it's not something that can occur in the playoffs. It has to be a continuous habit that is developed throughout an entire season. Probably put that number one as you caught me off guard with this question, but I'll put that number one. Playing hard is a talent, and hard playing dudes are still playing in the NBA right now.
And that goes back to chemistry and culture, right? I mean, that's what Sean Marks talks about with culture is like, hey, look at the Memphis Grizzlies. I mean, we lose John Morant, but the other guys just play hard. And when it's not there, it's glaring. I mean, you saw that with the Sixers. You saw that when Golden State's down, 60 in that one game or 55 points in that one game. When it's glaring, when it's not there. But again, players drive culture. That was a quote from Sean Marks the other day. And playing hard is a skill, and it's part of that culture.
You got it right there.
Hey, Chris, can we go back to your steakhouse analogy for a minute? Because I like that.
Yeah, I'm hungry too.
Sometimes you go to a high-priced steakhouse and somebody gets to fish.
Yes.
It's a little bit different.
When Capper's trying to pretend that he doesn't want to eat meat or whatever, he goes, oh, how's the salmon?
Well, that's exactly what I go with.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tom.
You look at the Nets superstars, right? And Simmons is kind of like the fish, right? He's just a little bit different. Unique player. He's not typical. It kind of reminds me of what Cap said about the zone. They can put such interesting lineups out there. When I think of that zone lineup, Claxton, Simmons, Durant, not necessarily traditional bigs, but that's a very long back line. That's three guys, 6'10", who can really move and get out on the perimeter. And that kind of comes back to the lineups that you put around Ben Simmons because he's such a unique guy.
Yeah, and you know what? It's you gotta have an attitude of what can we do. Let's not worry about what we can't do, but go out and sometimes playing hard and intensity and defending with passion, like that can make up for a lot of shortcomings. It can make up inches, right? It can make up some skill. You got to be able to just go out and do it and go get it and look at some of the bright spots of things like, hey, this net team maybe didn't play great against Boston. They still, they were still scoring over 106, 107 points a game. I look around the playoffs, there are teams scoring 80, 90 points. Milwaukee has struggled to score against the Celtics. So, you're there, just go out and yeah, well, they'll get better a little bit, but have a little more of a hunter mentality right now.
And remember, file that away, and I'm sure they will. How different the NBA, the playoffs are than the regular season, or how, to an enormous extent, the officiating has changed. It has been adjusted into the playoffs as opposed to in my eyes, in the regular season. That first game. What Kevin Durant against the Boston Celtics, what Kevin Durant went through physically, I think has got to be a reminder for the Nets to understand that that's might be how it might be officiated for periods of time in the playoffs. The amount of fouls that weren't called and what he had to go through to get from point A to point B, and the amount of shoves and bumps and whatever you want to call it that he had to go through. You've got to remember that throughout the season. And I think you also have got to evaluate your roster a little bit in regards to that. You've got to have a physicality about what you're bringing every night and with your organization and team.
Well, guys, Tom Dowd, BrooklynNets.com, Tim Capstraw, my partner. You talk about availability and putting team first. I mean, Capper, 20 years together, you haven't missed a game. Your availability and team first nature is exactly part of the Nets culture. You are embodying everything that Steve Nash and Sean Marks talked about the other day.
Man, maybe I'll be the logo.
Yes. Guys, thanks so much. And this is just the start. It was nice. We had a little cool down period. We reacted to what the GM and the coach did when they faced the media, gave you a little bit of what to look forward to. You keep going with the food analogy. We're setting the table.
Nice.
We're putting the orders in. And now we'll see what the Nets cook up in the postseason, in the offseason, and look forward to the 22-23 season. We'll continue to bring you this great content. The Voice of the Nets podcast will have various guests throughout the summer. TD is going to work with me on that as well. And thanks to everybody. Another edition coming up pretty soon. We're going to talk a little bit in the upcoming weeks about, it's the 20th anniversary of that NBA Finals team. So we want to make sure we're going to speak to some people about that as well. Hope you'll keep tuning in, subscribe. This is the Voice of the Nets with Chris Carrino. Thanks to the Capper, Tim Capstraw, and TD, Tom Dowd. And we'll talk to you again real soon.